Hello everyone, welcome to my video. I want to ask the question, is there a human being in the womb? I know that people have tried to answer that question, I don't know how many thousands of times, and I'm not saying I'm going to do a better job than anybody. It's just something that's been on my mind for a period of years now, not just this, but other things to do with abortion, and I just thought I need to get thoughts out there, and I don't know what's going to happen, but we'll just see. So, three things by way of introduction. Here, poke myself in the eye there. One, I think it's incredibly important that we differentiate between issues. So if I say, I think there's a human being in the womb, you might say, yeah, but Vicky, what if that child grows up unwanted? Won't that be terrible? And you totally have a point, but it's a separate issue. You know, there's the question of, is there a human being in the womb? And there's the question of, what do we do with the social repercussions of unwanted pregnancy? And those are two separate issues. And because it's complex, it's important that we can differentiate them. It's not that they don't have anything to do with each other, but we won't get anywhere if we use one to try to cancel out the other or anything like that. Number two, I think it's really, really important that we exercise good faith. So it's easy to misrepresent, mischaracterize each other's argument. So I would never go up to somebody who's, say, pro-choice and be like, you just want to kill babies, you know, because I really don't think that that's what they want to do, and that's not the way that the issue pans out in their mind at all. That's not where they're coming from at all. So it's important that we're fair with each other's arguments, you know, and, you know, conversely, I am not asking this question in order to be able to control women's bodies, you know. Yeah, that's not what my argument, that's not where I'm coming from. So I think it's really, really important that we don't exaggerate, that we don't overstate, we don't understate, we don't misrepresent what each other is saying, and instead we really listen wholeheartedly and really try to understand each other, and that's how we're going to have a productive conversation. And the third thing I would like to say is that I am not sorted. If, you know, anybody who knows me as a human being, I am not sorted in any way. I'm not the smartest person. I don't have all the answers. If you see a gap in my logic, if you think I don't make sense, if you think I have left something out that's important to consider, please point it out to me. You know, I want to know. I am not like self-satisfied in all of my thinking. I just really want to do my very best to apply everything in me to deal with issues in a thorough way. I think we owe it to ourselves to do that, to really apply ourselves. So here it goes. So you may be thinking to yourself, this is an unanswerable question. It's impossible to say for certain one way or the other whether there is a human being in the womb or not. And what I would ask you to consider, if that's your stance on it, is consider this analogy that you go up to somebody who's in charge of a demolition site, and the wrecking ball is all ready to go, this building is about to be torn down, and you ask the question, is there anybody left in that building? And the answer that comes back to you is, I don't know, I never checked, but we're going ahead with this anyway. I think a good word to describe that sort of a decision would be reckless. It's a reckless decision. And similarly, we really shouldn't be going about destroying something in the womb without being certain of what we're doing, because at the end of the day, the decision to destroy is final. It's really important that our ideas about this hold water before we make any big decisions. So towards the idea that there is a human being in the womb, there's a couple of different ways to think about this, but let's just start with a very simple case of cause and effect. So if I have blue and I have yellow and I mix them together and get green, and I run that experiment billions of times and get the same result every time, I start to have a really strong case for the idea that blue and yellow make green. Now, I am not a scientist, but as far as I understand, this is how experimental science works. You watch how things develop, you watch the outcomes, you record the findings, and you draw some conclusions. So if we have a human male sex cell and a human female sex cell, and they come together, and 9 months later you have the birth of a human being, and that experiment is run billions upon billions of times every single time with the same outcome, you start to have a really important stack of evidence there for the idea that those two cells coming together equals a human being. Like whenever a woman is giving birth, no one is on edge wondering, is it going to be a camel? Is it going to be an aardvark? We know what it's going to be. So on the basis of that reasoning of clear cause and effect, if there's a continuum of the development of life from the moment of conception right up until birth, if at birth we reckon that to be a human being, then what's to say that it's not a human being the moment before birth, and at 8 months pregnancy, and 7 months, and 6 months, right back to the moment of conception. Now, as far as I can see, I don't know what you think, but that argument is watertight to me. Now, if you want to make the case that actually there is a point during pregnancy prior to which the fetus is not to be considered a human being, then I would say you're at liberty to make that case, but the onus is on you to prove it. So I'd like to explore 5 different ways in which people try to draw this line, and I think it's really important in every instance to pick out what correlations are being drawn, what is held to define humanity in every case. Way number 1, the idea that prior to 6 weeks, the fetus doesn't even have a heartbeat anyway, or something to that effect. Could be a heartbeat, could be something else, but for a lot of people, the heartbeat tends to be an important marker. So we're drawing the correlation there between the humanity of the fetus and the presence of a heartbeat. Now, if we expand that, that becomes quite problematic. If somebody collapses in front of me from cardiac arrest, in that moment they don't have a heartbeat. Does that mean they're in any way less human? Does it make it any more okay for me to walk away from them and not try and resuscitate them? So it's a problematic idea to say, well, if it has a heartbeat, you can't touch it. You should really respect it as human. But if it doesn't, then it's okay. You can go ahead and destroy it. I've thought about why it may be that we would draw that line at that point, why we would think that the heartbeat is such a big deal. And of course, it's a really big deal to our lives. Like, none of us who are breathing and speaking right now do so without a heartbeat. And I think the heartbeat is one of those things that emotionally connects us to how life is bigger than us, because it's this thing that ticks on, whether you're awake or asleep, whether you're aware of it or not, and it goes on involuntarily. You can't make it happen. So I think the heartbeat is maybe something that we have a bit of reverence for in our imagination. And also maybe there's the fact that we don't identify with a human being that doesn't have a heartbeat, because who doesn't have a heartbeat? But why should the fact that we don't identify with someone mean that we take the liberty to get rid of them? I don't think that makes sense. I don't think it's watertight anyway. I don't think you can say with any kind of certainty prior to that point it's definitely not human. Way number 2, the fetus's ability to feel pain. So the thinking runs that if the fetus can feel pain, then it's not okay to terminate, but if it can't, then it's okay. Now, I have 3 issues with this. The first one being that there doesn't seem to be a lot of consensus about the exact point at which the fetus can feel pain. So that muddies the waters right away. How are you going to decide? The second issue I have with this is that it's drawing a correlation between humanity and the ability to feel pain. It's defining humanity by that standard. Now, if we expand that, to me that becomes problematic, because say I'm quadriplegic, say I can't feel 90% of my body, I can't feel anything from the neck down. Does that make me in any way less human? Does it make it any more okay for someone to come along and just, say, chop off my leg just because I can't feel it? So I don't think there's any way to really be able to say for sure, again, with certainty at this point, like, this is really the thing that defines us as human beings. And then the third issue I have with it is the very principle that just because someone can't feel pain, you can do whatever you want to them. I don't think that's okay. I don't think that I should be at liberty to impose my will on another just because they can't feel it. Way number 3, the viability of the fetus. So this is by far one of the most popular ways that people try to draw this line. So the argument goes that the point at which the fetus can survive outside of the womb, independently of the mother, is the point at which it is said to be viable. And beyond this point, it's not okay to abort, but prior to this point, it's okay to abort. So firstly, I would say, again, a problem with this is that the point of viability is changing as technology advances and babies are surviving younger and younger, and babies have been beating each other to that record over the years, and there's no reason to think that they wouldn't keep doing so. As an aside, we already have the phenomenon of test tube embryos, and it's a scientific fantasy to one day be able to grow a human being entirely outside of the womb. And in that scenario, where there is no interruption from the moment of conception right up until a baby is fully grown, how will that viability argument hold? You know, at what point will that developing fetus be said to be human? Don't know what you think about that. So the viability argument creates a correlation between our humanity and our independent physical survival. Now, that again, by extension, becomes quite problematic, because if you apply that thinking across the board, where does it leave people who are dependent upon something for their survival, be that a drug, a pacemaker, a treatment like dialysis, blood transfusions, or think about organ donations. Someone who is an organ recipient is literally depending on another person's body for their survival. Would we say that that makes them in any way less human? That puts into question their humanity. You know, it seems like a strange way to think. More broadly, what is it about dependence that makes us in any way less human? Is it not the other way around? Is it not that dependence is part and parcel of being human? You know, I'm sitting here speaking and you are where you are listening. Our brain can be called a social organ because it literally wouldn't have had the chance to develop those faculties if it weren't for the fact that someone, you know, our primary caregiver, very early on in life, gave us skin on skin contact, eye to eye contact, stimulated us, interacted with us, spoke to us, introduced us to the world around us. You know, if that hadn't happened, all of our faculties would be severely impeded right now. We wouldn't be able to have this conversation. We were dependent, and we're still dependent now. I mean, what is being a friend if not being dependable? What is having a friend if not being able to depend upon someone? And I know I'm talking about different types of dependence, but it's all one and the same. I mean, we're just so interconnected. And if we're going to say that a fetus is not human on account of its dependence, then we better say that we're not human either. And that brings me to a really big question of mine, which is, what are we doing to ourselves when we use the fetus's dependence against it? Its dependence is its vulnerability, and we're using that vulnerability to take the liberty to destroy it. What does that say about where we're at? Because vulnerability is life itself. Love is vulnerable, creativity is vulnerable, courage is vulnerable. Do we not want to be the sort of people who guard that vulnerability? That's the birthplace of life itself in all of its forms. Way number 4 is not so much a line that's being drawn during pregnancy, but simply a subjective feeling that what is growing inside of me is not a human being. And I may come to that conclusion from feeling disconnected from the process. Like, maybe I conceived with someone that I'm not in love with. Maybe I don't have a stable situation. Maybe the circumstances are all wrong and all I want to do is press delete. So I'm not going to regard this as my child. Now, please hear me on this. I am not dealing with the complexities of a woman's experience here. I'm only dealing with the impact of our thoughts on our ideas surrounding the humanity of the fetus, because I think that those ideas are of huge consequence. And I think it must be pointed out that to leave the definition of another's humanity to our subjective feeling is incredibly problematic. You know, I don't mean to be too heavy-handed about this, but I think at the heart of every form of oppression is some sort of arbitrary dehumanization. And when you think of why were black people enslaved, because white people decided arbitrarily that they weren't as human as us. Why were Jews persecuted? Because there was a whole campaign of dehumanization against them leading up to the final solution. Why did ISIS perpetrate genocide on the Yazidis 3 years ago? Because they looked upon them as less than human, even less than dogs. Even as we speak, there's 250 million Dalits in India, people who are regarded as untouchable and who are dehumanized in that way, and that keeps them in cycles of poverty. Every form of oppression, it's just what we do. You know, and I haven't tried to answer the huge question of what is it that makes us human positively? What is it that makes us human? And I'm not going to answer it because it's one of those massive philosophical questions that people have been debating about for centuries. But if I were to have a stab at it, I would say that, you know, if what turns us into inhumane oppressors is that propensity to dehumanize, then perhaps what makes us human, or at least humane, is our readiness to recognize the humanity in one another. I don't know what you think about that. Way number 5 is to draw the line at birth by not recognizing the humanity of a baby until it has become a distinct legal entity from the mother. So first of all, this is us elevating the law as being something so fundamental that it has the power to define us, even though we are the ones who collectively define it. So what this is literally saying is that the moment before birth, you are not a human being, and if somebody terminates you then, it's completely fine. But the moment after birth, you are vested with the full dignity of a human being, and if somebody dares to kill you then, they will encounter the full force of the law because they will have committed a homicide. Now, what's the difference between the moment before birth and the moment after birth? It's just a matter of location. One moment you're in the womb, the next you're in the open air. So what sort of correlation are we supposed to draw from this? That we're gonna let our humanity be defined by where we are in space? Is that it? You know, it all just seems like a really artificial way of looking at things. To say that there's no human being until there's a legal status is like saying there's no such thing as love until there's a marriage certificate. We all know that's not true. To my mind, the law is something that we should be using towards nurture and not towards dehumanization. And the thing that I find very, very sad is that all of this is leading to this scenario where the womb is not a safe place to be. As an aside, there's a word in the ancient Hebrew, raham, that means compassion, tenderness, mercy. And it's closely related to rehem, the word for womb. And I think that's a beautiful link because across so many species in the natural world, that's exactly what the womb is. The womb is a place of compassion, it is a place of mercy, where the infant can be shielded from the elements, shielded from what would otherwise endanger it and harm it. But through our law at the moment, we are turning the womb into this legalized killing field, into this place that you're safer out of. If you can't be safe in the womb, where can you be safe? So that is what I have to say about all of these different attempts to draw that line. Now again, if I'm not making sense, please let me know. I would be really grateful. As it stands, I don't think that any of these arguments are a surefire way of ascertaining that there is no human being in the womb and that it is therefore definitely okay to terminate. Another way of looking at all of this comes from Maureen Condick, who wrote a real quality essay a few years ago entitled Life, Defining the Beginning by the End. And I say it's a quality essay because it's not emotive, it's not political, it's not religious, it's just really reasonable and well written. In my opinion anyway, check it out. In it, she makes the point that the moment after death, the body is not hugely different from the moment before death, and yet something monumental has happened, which is that the brain and the spinal cord have stopped communicating with the rest of the body. And so the cycle of self-regulation of the body has broken down, and that moment of brain death is reckoned to be death because at that moment the body stops acting as a coordinated organism. So applying that logic to the beginning of life, it would follow that human life begins when a self-regulating organism comes into existence in the womb, and Condick would say that the point of conception is that very point because at that moment the cells begin to divide and to multiply according to the genetic code, and from there it's all a self-regulating, self-correcting process. So that's very different from a clump of cells like a tumour, which is an uncontrolled, random, abnormal division of cells that tends towards disarray and not towards order. In closing, I'd simply make the point that when you look in the mirror, everything you see, all of that information was present the moment of your conception. And not only was it present, but it was on its way to becoming what you are today. That process started way back then and hasn't stopped for one moment since. The thing that's really made a difference is just the passage of time. 20 years ago, my body looked really different from what it is today. My genetics are more fully expressed today, you could say, than they were 20 years ago. And yet I wasn't any less human 20 years ago than I am today. So why would you or I think that we were any less human in the womb? So guys, if you've made it this far and listening to me, thank you so much. Thank you for taking the time. And I just want you to know right now that whoever you are, whatever your history has been, and wherever your convictions lie, you are valuable. So thank you so much, and who knows, maybe I'll see you soon. Bye!